Well, hello and welcome to your Boston Massacre notes. So I wanted to start off just with this image. This is an engraving that was done by Paul Revere, who is going to be a well-known player in the Revolution. So he prints this engraving. And a couple of things I'd like you to observe about this because this is a famous image that comes up everywhere and it's sort of what everybody thinks of when they think of the Boston Massacre once they have studied it. So you can see the red uniforms right away. That should, in your brain, you should be thinking, okay, those are the British soldiers. Those are the what we're going to call redcoats, is sort of the slang term for them. And then over here, you see a little bit of blue, which is going to eventually become the uniform color of the revolutionaries or the colonists. And you can see that there are clearly some injuries happening here. So I'll give you this in your notes. You don't have to write this down right now, but there were 5 colonists killed in this event. And you can see here there is a black man on the ground, and he's going to be important because he is one of the people that is the first to die for the cause of the revolution. His name is Crispus Attucks. He was likely a former slave that had mixed heritage of Native American as well as African. And he is a symbol because he's a man who got out of a situation only to then die at this event and become sort of a symbol of the sad, you know, event that happened in this day. So keep in mind the 5 people. So it's no British soldiers lost their lives, but 5 colonists did. And I'll go into the specifics about that in the notes. So on your piece of paper, and this is on page 7 in your notebook, I'm going to type how my notes look so that your notes will look the same. So first, let me just make my page as big as possible. You should be writing this in your notebook. There'd be no point in you really, I mean, if you wanted to type it and print it that way, you certainly could, but you want to make sure that your notes are titled Boston Massacre. We'll make that big and put it in the center. I hand wrote these in my notebook, but I'm going to type them here for you so that you can see it. Okay, so we have what we're going to have is the 5 W's. So the who, what, when, where, and why about the Boston Massacre, and then there'll be some things for you to do once we are done. So we want to have our who, our what, our when, our where, and you can of course pause me, and our why. And we want to leave a little bit of space to give a little bit of room for Crispus Attucks. We want to have 3 facts about him, and the last part, the summary, was it really a massacre in the way that we think of that word? And we will get to that in just a moment at the very end. So that's the completion, that's the totality of your notes. It'll just be that information. So first for the who, we know that it was Bostonians is how your book and how most articles refer to them, but for the sake of making it really easy to know who we're talking about, we have Boston colonists versus British soldiers. Okay, so that's our who. We'll make that obvious here, and hopefully you're doing the same. And what they were basically doing was they were in the streets. The British soldiers were always stationed around Boston and some of the other colonies, and they were hanging around the stores and they were just guarding, basically like, you know, weapons at the ready, standing around town, making sure that everybody was sort of following the rules. So it was kind of meant to intimidate, right? To have soldiers around with weapons, and the colonists would be caring about their business. They'd be walking through town, doing their shopping, doing their work, whatever they were doing. And they just kind of got into a little skirmish, right? Like people were mouthing off to each other, and the colonists were saying, you know, we don't want you here anymore, leave, we didn't invite you, we did not send for you, we will drive you away. And the British soldiers, I'm sure, were mouthing off back, and it just got a little bit out of control this time. I mean, this had happened before. Anytime you have unwanted soldiers stationed in somebody's town, there's going to be some words exchanged. But this time it just got to the point of action being taken. So when the colonists were sort of harassing the British soldiers and the British soldiers were mouthing off back to them, and somebody in the crowd said, come on, and there's a quote from an actual primary source taken from the time. Come on, you rascals, you bloody backs, you lobster scoundrels, fire if you dare. So then they fire, right? The British soldiers do fire. Sorry, my cat put some extra letters in there. And that's when you get your 5 dead colonists. So what we want to have, what I just said. So this is the way I wrote it in my notes to make it easy. You have number 1 step, the colonists say to the soldiers, right, fire if you dare. The soldiers to the colonists, they don't really say this, I guess, just to them, they fire. And the end result is, okay, so that's your basic what happened. So when does this happen? This is, this is March 5th, 1770. All right, and where? Obviously, this is in Boston, Massachusetts. All right, so why, whenever I do 5Ws with my students, sometimes I have to prompt you to think about what kind of why are you asking. So in this case, the question is, why is this a big deal? Any loss of life is always a big deal, in my opinion. But why would we call something a massacre that was 5 people, right? We know that there are battles, there were battles prior to this in various wars, and certainly after this, where you have thousands of people who lose their lives in a single battle. So, why would you call something with 5 losses a massacre? And the answer is to make it sound like a big deal, right? It's called propaganda. When you are using information to influence people's opinions, the words you choose can have an impact on what they think really happened. So, let me give you an example, maybe from your family. So, when I was growing up, I have a sister who's 2.5 years younger than me. And anytime we would get into a fight, I and she would do the same thing, would totally blow it out of proportion, right? So there was one specific time where I was trying to keep her out of our shared bedroom. I was like holding the door closed with all of my might, and she pushed it open, and the doorknob kind of like went into my eye, and I got a black eye. So as I'm telling my mom the story, I'm totally making it into propaganda. She was banging on the door, Mom, and when she opened the doorknob went into my eye and I fell backwards. And then she came over and hit me again in the same eye, totally making it into a humongous deal that it wasn't, kind of adding some things that maybe didn't exactly happen that way. But that's an example of propaganda, right? So sure, the 5 people that were killed here, that's awful, and it's never, it's never okay to have a loss of life like that. But would we call it a massacre compared to other battles? Probably not. But this was termed a massacre by some of the colonists, like Paul Revere, who you saw his painting, his engraving at the beginning of this presentation, Sam Adams, who we know is going to, he kind of already started the group the Sons of Liberty, and he uses this information to continue to explain that this is why we have to resist the British. Samuel Adams and Paul Revere, they're colonists, and they're telling other colonists, like, look what just happened. Not only have we been taxed and have we been forced to take in British soldiers into our homes, and we're having our rights violated, and we have to pay taxes on tea and paper and pencils and everything. Now they've actually killed some of our fellow colonists. Like, we cannot stand for this anymore. So why is this important? Colonists used this event as propaganda. And just so you know what that is, information used to influence opinion. So if you're not from Boston, if you're from one of the other colonies, you're in South Carolina, and you're reading this article when it's published in the newspapers, after it happened, and you read it and you see that engraving and it says 5 innocent weaponless Bostonians killed by British soldiers, you're probably going to get fired up and mad at the British as well. So that's what it was intended to. All right, the next part of your notes is your Crispus Attucks section. And there is, once you're done with listening to me, there's a little one page, I wouldn't even call it an article, it's a paragraph on Crispus Attucks that I showed you in the intro. You'll want to read through that and get 3 facts about him to put in this section. And then the last part is just your opinion. So based on what I've told you and based on the information you know, just write 1 or 2 sentences. Was it really a massacre? And explain why you think it was or was not. 1 or 2 sentences would be totally fine for this. And that will get you everything you need to be ready for when you see this on a test. So let me know if I can help in any way, but that's all set for your Boston Massacre notes.